and make sure it kind of turns over.
Give it a second. Yeah. Okay, you don't seem to be freezing.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I'm here with Jess. Jess is kind enough to do a Theramonial interview with us today. Hi, Jess.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks for being here. So we're just going to dive in. I'm going to go ahead and read the first question and then let you answer, and we'll just move right along. Okay. So what made you curious about therapy?
I've had multiple experiences with therapy in my life, both as a child and an adult. It's never anything that I think in my family culture we shied away from. But the most, I guess, significant one would be as an adult. A couple years ago, I was in an abusive relationship. And at the very end of that relationship, I went to see someone pretty intensively, a counselor, for about a month. I had been living with this person, and then I was home kind of recuperating, and I went to see this counselor, and he was totally invaluable to me at that point in my life when I was still really, I think, vulnerable to my former partner and vulnerable to the thought patterns that develop in abusive and controlling relationships. But then I moved. I was home where I grew up, and then I moved to Texas for my PhD, which is where I am now. And I thought, okay, I'm better. Like, that person helped me so much. Got it, and I had all these little, what's the word, like phrases that counselor had said to me that I kept with me all the time, like mantras, almost, that were really helpful to me whenever I would feel myself kind of slipping back into thought patterns that I knew were detrimental to me. But then about a year later, some things happened, some things transpired that brought up a lot of the old pains and anxieties and really trauma, really like massive trauma. And so I realized, okay, I haven't worked through this, right? I've been kind of using these phrases and mantras to smooth the moment, but I haven't unpacked this. So then I found a therapist here in Texas, and I saw her for maybe 8 months, maybe. And it was really difficult, but really helpful to unpack and I know unpack is like such a therapy term, but it's what happened. And she diagnosed me more clearly. She helped me understand a lot of what I was still doing to keep myself in that relationship in some ways, psychologically. So, it wasn't so much that I was curious about therapy as I was not really going to make it without it.
Sure. Yeah. Cool. It sounds like there wasn't much hesitation for you in terms of like recognizing the need to seek help, and like no shame or stigma or like.
I think that after I saw the person while I was home, I felt so relieved to feel even a little better. Like, yeah. I think after that relationship and everything that happened, I thought, I'm never going to feel better again. Like, this is just how I feel now. Mm-hmm. And so I was just so relieved that I almost was manic. Like, I almost went, and then moving and all the excitement of starting a PhD program, I was like, I'm fine. I got this.
Yeah.
And so at first there was kind of a little disappointment, like, oh, I don't have this. This is still here. But then I was like, yeah, I definitely need to see this person, see a therapist for sure.
Yeah. And even that groundwork was kind of there just because you mentioned seeing a therapist even as a kid. Like, there was, the door was kind of open for you, maybe feeling like some disappointment in yourself for needing to kind of walk through the door again, but it wasn't so much like this whole idea of getting help felt
right.
Okay.
My disappointment wasn't in therapy. I think even if you're not going through something, a therapist is just right. Like, I didn't think I was going through something, and then just a small series of events really undid me.
Yeah.
So obviously there was, it was latent in some ways. But yeah, it wasn't the stigma of therapy. I was disappointed that I still had so much roiling inside me.
You kind of figured it out.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
But I think that therapy really helped me, like, returning to her made me realize that this was in some ways a condition if that makes sense.
Sure.
That trauma creates conditions that you don't really necessarily recognize. So
Sure. Yeah. Like you said, it kind of becomes like a new normal
mm-hmm.
rather than some anomaly that you can actively
Exactly.
work on.
Exactly.
So this may feel kind of redundant, but I'm curious if you can help people maybe who've never done this before. You're kind of, you know, well practiced in like finding a therapist and, you know,
Right.
showing up to therapy, but what is it like and what has it been like for you to reach out and make contact with a therapist when you're first starting to need some help, whether it was back home or in Texas or, you know, any other time?
I think that sometimes if you meet a therapist and you don't click or you don't feel good, it's easy to say, oh, therapy's not for me, when really it's just like that therapist's not for you. I think it's okay to kind of, gosh, shop around sounds really tacky. That's not what I mean.
No, that's the term I use.
Okay. Like if you don't feel comfortable with a therapist, they're not the only therapist in the world. And it's not there. Like I've definitely had therapists that I was like, this is not working.
Yeah.
You know, this is not, it's the same thing. I feel like people feel comfortable shopping around for a medical doctor that they feel comfortable with, but for a therapist, they don't. So I've been lucky to be often in like academic settings where student health is a pretty florid.
Yeah.
Or what's the word? Like there's a lot of doctors at your disposal. And I've gotten lucky to have doctors that I did click with. But I've definitely, like in college, I went to see a therapist one time at our student health, and it was like not working at all.
Yeah.
And I didn't go back, and I probably should have. So yeah, I think it's just try a few people. That's fine. It's not therapy; it's the therapist.
So along those same lines, how did you know that you mentioned these two specific therapists that were both really helpful, and just with time constraints and location, you know, you had to kind of shift over, but how did you know that they were helping you? You know, how did you know that it was a good fit?
I mean, it's kind of like meeting a friend or meeting a date. I mean, not that obviously your therapist is not your friend. But I know that I've always needed someone that responds and engages and doesn't just, like, I don't feel comfortable with just tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. Like I need maybe a stronger engagement and feedback and sort of assignments, I guess. I'm kind of like a student almost. And both of the therapists that I saw, I guess, could probably read that in me, right? That might not be their therapy style with someone else, but because they saw in me that I didn't just want to sit and talk and leave after an hour, that I wanted, you know, guidelines in some ways. That's what I needed. That made me feel better. So both the therapists I saw right after, and then the woman I was seeing for quite some time, were like, go home and write this down, or like bring this idea to me next time. So it felt almost like a course, which I'm more used to. So
yeah. You mentioned this idea of like it's the same as finding a friend or meeting somebody new, which is very hard to measure. You know, it's really hard to describe concretely. And so it's useful to have some of the concrete things that you described, like someone who's a little more direct, a little more interactive, gives you some things to do, some little homework assignments, helps you feel like you're kind of moving along. And yet what that does, those concrete things do for you is help you find that abstract, that more unmeasurable, immeasurable connection, right? Kind of like highlight it for you.
Right.
Okay. So again, you kind of already answered this. In terms of what was most helpful, it sounds like kind of the homework and the congruency from session to session really worked for you. What else?
I think that sometimes when you have, for me, there was like it turned out I was very textbook. Like my situation was very textbook. And I think we often think in our private lives, things feel so extraordinary.
Sure.
And in a way, it was really, really emotional thing. It was really useful to find out that this was a very typical pattern, and that like my therapist could identify it well before I could. And it made me feel a little bit less, you know, like hopeless and ashamed.
Yeah.
And also I started to do this thing where, if I started to have really massive anxiety, or if I started to kind of go through an episode of panic, I would think, okay, put all these thoughts in like a box for my session. Like it was useful to me to think I can work all of this out with my therapist, as opposed to it just coming for me over and over again during the week. And I think that works for all kinds of anxiety. Anxiety can feel so loud and noisy. And if you say, okay, I can deal with this when I speak with my therapist, I think it's very useful for just day-to-day life.
Cool. Yeah. So the therapist was a good fit, but then just even the structure of therapy.
Oh, okay.
Is that what you're saying? Like I have this hour, this dedicated time to work on it, so I can put it away and not shove it aside forever, but just put it away nicely, and I can come back to it.
And not let it like expand in my mind in the meantime. Not let it snowball.
Yeah. And I love what you said about being textbook, because I think it feels so out of the ordinary when we experience something out of the ordinary. It feels so kind of unique and kind of crazy, and that can kind of discount the logic. The emotional part of our brain can override the logical parts of our brain that tell us that we know this happens and it's okay. But to have a third party, especially someone who really kind of knows what they're doing, say you fit into this pattern, you fit into this description, and the good news there is we know exactly how to help you, because it's textbook, right?
Exactly.
That's cool. Okay. So what hasn't worked or didn't work for you in therapy? And maybe there isn't anything so much in these couple therapists you mentioned more specifically, but maybe in other experiences or in general, what hasn't worked for you?
I think I have two answers, and one is really broad and one is specific to just me. I think in the past I thought, oh, this therapist needs to like figure me out. Right. I came in kind of like, you solved me, as opposed to being open to the process.
Yeah.
So that didn't work, but that was my fault. I think I was just young and immature, and that's probably how I approached like every interaction. But particularly more recently, I did notice that when I wanted to talk about the larger political climate in therapy, because that is part of my life and certainly part of my anxieties and certainly part of my relationships. And I felt that sometimes my therapist was like not as comfortable with that conversation. I don't know why, but sometimes I felt she would kind of redirect us to the personal, and seeing those things as inextricable. We just had a difference of ideology, I think. But then I tried to be like, well, she knows better than I do in terms of what I need to spend this hour doing. But yeah, sometimes I felt a little cut off at the pass in those, when I would bring those moments to the forefront. But that's pretty personal. I mean, that's pretty me specific. So
yeah, I wonder, looking back at it now, if you could, like, if you feel like you could have brought that up with her and said, like, it seems like when I talk about this, you're kind of purposely steering me away. I don't know.
Right. No, I think that it was kind of near the end of our time together.
Yeah.
And I think it was also part of my doing better in some ways, because I was relating my situation to, the Me Too movement, larger cultural narratives that I had kind of been brought up in, and ways that I had, I don't know, like allowed myself to believe things that were destructive to me, thinking that they were powerful or constructive. And I think that I trusted her so much because she'd helped me so much that I thought, oh, she must know best that we shouldn't delve into these issues. But then I think if I had kept seeing her for longer, I would have felt comfortable saying, I'm feeling a little weird about when these conversations come up between us. So
it sounds like the relationship could have survived it. Like you felt comfortable in order to say, something's off, I need to talk about it.
Absolutely. I think it was totally just my like absolute reverence for the amount of growth I'd done with her. And then it was a time she was going into private practice. And so it was kind of like and I felt we were at a good point. It was just a natural stopping point.
Cool. So yeah, it was more just like a real decision on your part. Like I can afford to not address this with her. I've gotten so much out of this. This is
Right.
working. I can kind of address this on my own or process it in other ways. I can do that. Okay.
Right, but I wasn't like afraid to bring it to her attention.
Right.
She didn't create that environment. No.
Okay. So how did you know therapy was complete? You said 9 months total, one with one therapist, and then 8 really kind of consistently, right, with her?
Well, so the person that I saw just after was only like a few weeks.
Yeah.
But I was seeing him like twice a week, and
okay.
It was really, that was like
intense. Yeah.
Major damage control, like,
crisis. Yeah.
Yes, super crisis counseling, and incredibly useful. And I was in a complete fog. So that was really clarifying. But then, this other therapist I saw for 8 or 9 months, I guess. As I said, it was just kind of natural. And she has said, if you ever need, I think she calls it a tune-up. I have her phone number, so for her private practice. So if I needed to go see her, I would. And I feel really comfortable knowing that she's there if it ever does kind of waterfall the way that it did when I first started seeing her. And I know there's a lot of conversations she and I had that I carry with me. I still have kind of a, put it in the box, because I know in some ways how the conversation between us would go. So it was just a natural, it didn't seem like something that needed to go on into perpetuity.
I see. And you mentioned some of the timing too, like her shifting her career, her schedule, her business model.
Right.
It just felt kind of natural and good. I wonder what it was like for you in that last session, saying goodbye, like the door will be open, but knowing that you aren't likely to see her much.
It was okay. Like, I think that's how you mentioned that a lot of these things are not measurable. So I don't really know how to describe just the ease of the end. I had just gotten engaged, and she definitely saw that as like, oh, you're done. And I was like, no, definitely not. Like, definitely still have a lot of problems. But, it was a nice moment in my life, certainly, where things were blossoming as opposed to deteriorating. So it just seemed like the right time. And she works more with teenagers now, I know. But again, she said anytime, she's just literally in a different office. So, but she left campus, and it was just harder and more expensive. So.
Yeah.
But the session was very positive and, easy, no trauma, no drama,
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So last question, what would you tell your pre-therapy self?
Not to date that person. What would I tell my pre-therapy self? I guess, I don't know. That even if you feel fine, you probably don't understand some of the physiological things that are happening in your body and your psyche. You might, even if you're not sure what you want to talk about, if you're feeling stuck, or if you're feeling a lot of anxiety, just give it a go. Maybe don't wait until you're back in a really, really rough place, if that makes sense. Because by the time I returned to her, by the time I looked her up, it was everything that had happened, that it was in the summer. I was like not functioning very well. Yeah. So, and I'd been like super, super high functioning. And then it's like, it was a pretty big drop emotionally. So I wish I just kind of kept therapy up steadily in the interim, because I think I might have saved myself that pain.
That's cool. That's powerful.
I hope so. It's been like, I guess I stopped seeing her a little bit over a year ago. Is that right? Yeah, give or take. And so I was seeing her for, the better part of a year, and then it's been a year since then. And I've definitely just been much more even.
Yeah.
Whereas before, again, like I described, I was operating almost over. I was like hypervigilant, over the top, over energized in some ways, which can also be bad.
For sure. It's exhausting. Yeah.
Got a
Good.
lot of work done, but yeah, it was, but I was definitely spinning my wheels a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much, Jess.